I would like to share three separate stories this morning, but ones that are tied together by a common thread. The first one is about a missionary who was sent to work in Africa. Having grown up next to the Pacific Ocean, he had hoped that he would be stationed along the coast. But instead, he was placed about 85 miles inward. When he began teaching his students, he would often mention to them the ocean, and consequently, they soon realized that he had a special affection for it. In his attempts to share the Christian gospel, the missionary told them that it began when God sent a special gift to the world. When Jesus came to earth as a baby in a manger. Consequently, he informed them that a hallmark of being a Christian is learning how to give. He hoped that his message was getting through, but he wasn't really quite sure. One day, when the school was closed during a 2-week break, the missionary heard a knock on his door. Standing in front of him was one of his students, with a broad smile on his face. As he took a closer look at this young man, the missionary noticed that he had scars on his arms, legs, and face, that his clothes were torn, indicating that he had walked through some rough terrain. But it was what he was holding that surprised the missionary the most. In his hand was a basket full of seashells. Clearly, they had not been found locally. Then it dawned on the missionary. This young man had walked to the coast to get them. Here is a gift from the ocean, the young man said, beaming with joy. Overcome with emotion, the missionary replied, "But you walked 170 miles to do this for me?" With great delight, the man responded, "The long walk is part of the gift." The second story is a very familiar one. It is our gospel lesson for today, from the 2nd chapter of Matthew. It is the reading for this day of Epiphany. And while there are a lot of things I could consider in this text, I would like to focus on the journey the wise men made. Unfortunately, the only information Matthew shares with us is this. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. From this one verse, we can glean two important pieces of information. First, Matthew says that they were wise men, or literally in the Greek, magoi. And second, Matthew tells us that these wise men came from the east. The term magi was first used to characterize priests and wise men among the Medes, Persians, and Babylonians, those whose chief learning was astronomy and astrology. astrology. And while we cannot say with 100% certainty, based on this information, the best guess that we have is that the journey of the Magi was somewhere between 800 miles and 1,000 miles. And just to remind you, traveling 2,000 years ago was neither fast nor easy. Those traveling by caravan would do well to complete 15 miles in a day. And as we know, the journey to Jesus that they took even took them on a little bit of a detour. But these Magi were not to be deterred after going such a great distance. They stopped in Jerusalem and visited with King Herod, and they learned from the biblical scholars that the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem. After securing that information, they made the brief 6-mile trip to Bethlehem. I can only imagine the shock on the faces of Mary and Joseph as these wise men came into their home, bowed down, and began to worship their young son, bringing him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And as they described the journey they just endured, and as Mary and Joseph listened, spellbound, I can almost hear one of the Magi saying, "The long walk is part of the gift." As I mentioned at the beginning, I have 3 stories to share. And the third one is also quite familiar. It is also the story of a journey, but one that was a far greater distance, one that was far more self-sacrificing than either of the 2 I just mentioned, if you can believe that. It is a trip that can't be measured in miles. It is a trip that can't be measured in days, weeks, or years. It is a trip that not one of us could take. In fact, it was a trip that only one person could take. And that person was Jesus. For Jesus spanned the chasm that separated heaven and earth. Jesus bridged the gap that separated God from humanity. To be perfectly honest, it is an unthinkable journey that Jesus made, leaving the confines of his heavenly home, pitching his tent among us, to use John's words, dwelling among us for 33 years, experiencing everything that we experience in life, and ultimately making a final journey to a cross where he laid down his life for us. And the Apostle Paul tells us exactly why it is that Jesus made this journey. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children. In other words, Jesus made the journey for us. Jesus made this journey so that we might be restored into a relationship with God as his beloved children. And without a doubt, the long walk was part of the gift. All three of these stories share some things in common. A long journey and a remarkable act of self-sacrifice. And so, to close, let me present you with a challenge. Consider what journey you might make on behalf of someone else. Consider what act of sacrifice you might make, either to God or on behalf of someone else. And I believe that there are two significant reasons for us to do so. First of all, it is the fulfillment of God's desire for us. As the Apostle Paul writes, I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. When we present our bodies as living sacrifices, worship is more than just something that we do for an hour on Sunday morning. Worship becomes the essence of who we are, as well as what we do. And second, when we make these sacrifices, we discover true joy in life. When he saw the face of his teacher after showing him that basket full of seashells, that young man knew that his sacrifice had been worth it. When the Magi saw the child Jesus and bowed down to worship him, they knew that their journey had been a complete success. And so may we find ways that we too can go to great lengths for God or for the sake of others. For in doing so, we will also discover that not only are we a blessing to others, but we ourselves are blessed.